Imagine two people standing on opposite sides of a glass wall. They are looking at the exact same landscape, the same stock market, the same real estate deals, the same technological revolutions. But while one sees a minefield of risks and reasons to say no, the other sees a playground of patterns and calculated entries. This wall isn't made of money, and it isn't made of luck. It is built entirely out of the invisible architecture of the human mind. We often talk about the 1% as if they are a different species, fueled by greed or some secret inheritance. But if you stripped away their bank accounts today, most would be back at the top within a few years. Why? Because wealth is not something they have. It is something they are. It is a psychological frequency. In his profound exploration of the forbidden laws of financial psychology, our author pulls back the curtain on this hidden operating system, revealing that the primary difference between the masses and the ultra-wealthy isn't their capitalists, their map of reality. This journey matters today more than ever because we are living through a period of the great disconnect. The old rules: go to school, get a steady job, save 10%, and retire at 65 are failing. That map was designed for an industrial age that no longer exists. To thrive now, you have to understand the forbidden laws. We aren't just talking about budget spreadsheets. We are talking about the visceral, often uncomfortable truths about how power and value actually move through the world. Throughout this exploration, we will encounter 4 pillars of the wealthy mind: the shift from labor to leverage, understanding that your hands can only make you a living, but your systems can make you a fortune; the alchemy of risk, learning why the search for security is the most dangerous gamble of all; the sovereignty of time, realizing that the 1% don't buy things, they buy back their lives; the identity shift, moving from a person who wants to be rich to a person who is a generator of value. As we walk through these chapters, I want you to set aside your current financial situation. Forget your debt, your salary, or your savings for a moment. This isn't a lecture on accounting. It's an invitation to an intellectual renovation. We are going to deconstruct the shadow beliefs you inherited from your upbringing and replace them with the high-level logic of those who play the game at the highest level. Let's begin the process of Chapter 1. The Genetic Code of Wealth. Most people are not stopped by the lack of opportunity. They are stopped by the invisible fences of their own upbringing. To understand how the 1% think, we have to start with a concept that is often uncomfortable to confront. Your financial identity was likely handed to you before you were old enough to open a bank account. We like to believe we are rational actors making logical choices about our careers and investments. But for most of us, our relationship with money is less like a conscious choice and more like a piece of biological software, genetic code of wealth, or lack thereof. Think of it like an internal thermostat. If you were raised in an environment where money was a source of stress, a subject of arguments, or something that doesn't grow on trees, your internal thermostat was set to survival. When a person with a survival thermostat suddenly comes into a large sum of money, perhaps through a bonus, a small inheritance, or even the lottery, their subconscious mind begins to panic. It feels too hot to return to the comfortable temperature of struggle they've known their whole lives. They will unconsciously find ways to dissipate that wealth. They'll buy a depreciating luxury, lend money to an unreliable relative, or simply lose it through poor timing. They return to their baseline because their mental code demands it. The 1%, however, operate on a thrival thermostat. To them, having $1 million in the bank isn't a goal reached. It's the bare minimum for room temperature. If they lose it all, they feel too cold, and their psychological drive kicks into overdrive to return to their baseline of millions or billions. This isn't just ambition. It's a biological imperative to align their outer reality with their inner identity, the myth of the hard worker. We are told from a young age that the secret to wealth is working hard. This is perhaps the most pervasive lie in the middle-class playbook. If hard work were the primary driver of wealth, the hardest working people on the planet, construction workers, nurses, farmers, would be the wealthiest. But they aren't. The 1% understand a fundamental truth. Hard work is a prerequisite, but it is not the engine. The engine is value scaling. The middle-class mind is trained to look at a task and ask, how much work can I do? The wealthy mind looks at a problem and asks, how much value can I create, and how can I decouple that value from my physical presence? Consider the analogy of the fisherman. The middle-class mindset is the fisherman who wakes up at 4 a.m., rows out into the lake, and spends 12 hours catching fish by hand. He works incredibly hard. He is exhausted at the end of the day. He is honorable, but he can only ever catch as many fish as his 2 hands allow. The 1% mindset is the person who spends that same 12 hours designing a net, or better yet, building a fleet of automated boats. While the first fisherman is working, the second is architecting. The first man's income is linear. It's a straight line on a graph that stops the moment he gets sick or tired. The second man's income is exponential. He has cracked the genetic code of wealth by realizing that labor is a commodity, but systems are an asset. The scarcity trap versus the abundance loop. One of the forbidden realizations of financial psychology is that saving is often a form of stagnation. Now, this sounds heretical. We are taught to save every penny, but the 1% view money differently. To the masses, money is a shield, something to be hoarded, to protect against a rainy day. This is the scarcity trap. When you hoard money out of fear, you are essentially telling your brain that there is a limited supply and you might never get more. This creates a psychological state of contraction. To the ultra-wealthy, money is not a shield. It is a seed. A seed is useless if it stays in the bag. Its only value is in its potential to be planted and turned into a forest. The 1% are comfortable with empty pockets if they know their capital is out in the world working for them. They understand the velocity of money, the idea that wealth is created by the speed at which capital moves, not the depth at which it is buried. Rewriting the code, the identity audit. So, how do you change this genetic code? It starts with an identity audit. You have to look at your financial life not as a series of balance sheets, but as a series of psychological confessions. When you receive a large bill, do you feel a tightening in your chest? That is the scarcity code. When you see someone more successful than you, do you look for reasons why they cheated or were lucky? That is the ego defense code, protecting you from the reality that you could be doing more. Do you find yourself saying, I can't afford that, instead of how can I afford that? The first is a dead end. The second is a cognitive workout. The 1% don't have better brains. They have better questions. They've rewritten their code to view the world as an infinite series of puzzles rather than a series of barriers. They understand that money is a social construct, a way of measuring the value you've provided to others. Therefore, to get more money, you don't work harder at your job. You find a way to provide more value to more people. The psychological price of admission. There is a weight to this shift. Moving from a survival mindset to a thrival mindset requires you to endure a period of intense cognitive dissonance. You will have to leave behind the comfort of the collective struggle. There is a strange, dark camaraderie in being broke. You always have someone to complain with. When you decide to rewrite your genetic code, you lose your membership in the complaint club. The 1% are often seen as cold or detached because they refuse to participate in the poverty of spirit that defines middle-class social rituals. They don't want to talk about how expensive gas is. They want to talk about how to own the energy companies. This shift in conversation is the first step in the mutation of your financial DNA. Wealth is not a goal you achieve. It is a byproduct of the identity you adopt. If you do not upgrade your internal financial thermostat, your subconscious will sabotage any external success you find. The code is written, but code can be refactored. Now that we understand the who, we must understand the how. In the next chapter, we dive into the most misunderstood concept in the history of finance, the true nature of risk. Chapter 2. The Alchemy of Risk and Certainty. The average person views risk as a threat to their survival. The 1% view security as the greatest threat to their potential. If you want to find the exact border between the middle class and the ultra-wealthy, look no further than their definition of the word risk. For most of us, risk is a dirty word. It's associated with loss, embarrassment, and the terrifying prospect of starting over. We are conditioned from birth to seek to harbor the steady paycheck, the guaranteed pension, the safe career path. But there is a hidden tax on that safety. a tax so high that it eventually consumes the very security it promised to protect. The 1% understand a fundamental law of financial alchemy. Certainty is an expensive commodity. When you buy certainty, you are paying with your upside. When you embrace uncertainty, you are being paid to provide a solution to the world's chaos. The illusion of the safe path. Let's look at the standard safe life, a 9-to-5 job with a reputable company. To the middle-class mind, this is the pinnacle of security. But the 1% look at that same job and see a massive, unhedged risk. Why? Because you have a single point of failure. If your boss decides they don't like you, if the industry shifts, or if an AI can suddenly do your job for 10% of the cost, your income drops to zero instantly. You are 100% dependent on a single source of truth. In contrast, the wealthy mind prefers asymmetric risk. This is the core of their alchemy. Asymmetric risk is a situation where the downside is known and limited, but the upside is potentially infinite. Think of a writer starting a newsletter, or an entrepreneur launching a software product. The downside is limited. They lose some time, and perhaps a few $1,000s. That's the floor. But the upside is a global audience, recurring revenue, and a multi-million-dollar exit. There is no ceiling. The 1% are obsessed with finding these bets where they can be wrong 9 times. But when they are right once, it pays for their entire life. The middle class, conversely, takes symmetric risks. They work 40 hours to get 40 hours of pay. If they don't show up, they get nothing. Their floor is low, and their ceiling is bolted shut. The volatility tax versus the inflation of soul. Most people confuse volatility with risk. Volatility is the up and down movement of a stock price or the month-to-month fluctuation of a business's revenue. Risk is the permanent loss of capital. The 1% are masters at stomach-turning volatility. They understand that the market and life moves in cycles. When the market crashes 30%, the masses see it as a sign to run for the hills. They sell at the bottom because their nervous systems cannot handle the lack of certainty. They pay the volatility tax. The wealthy, however, have trained their psychology to see volatility as a sale. They know that the most wealth is created during times of maximum pessimism, while everyone else is paying for the feeling of safety by staying in cash or low-yield bonds. The 1% are leaning into the discomfort. They realize that the safe path holding cash while inflation eats 5% of its value every year is actually a guaranteed 100% risk of losing purchasing power over time. They would rather take a 50% chance of being wrong today for a 500% chance of being right tomorrow. The psychology of skin in the game. There is a psychological weight to risk that acts as a filter. It keeps the uncommitted out. This is what Nassim Taleb calls skin in the game. The 1% don't just want to be right. They want to be responsible. There is a story of a bridge builder in ancient Rome. To ensure the bridge wouldn't collapse, the law required the architect to stand under the central arch while the first heavy chariots crossed over it. If the bridge failed, the architect died. That is true risk. In our modern world, most people spend their lives trying to avoid standing under the arch. They want the rewards without the exposure. But the forbidden law states that nature does not give her secrets to those who won't bleed for them. The 1% accept the weight of the arch. They understand that by taking on the responsibility of failure, they earn the right to the rewards of success. If you are an employee, you are shielded from the downside of the company. You still get paid if the company has a bad month. But you are also shielded from the upside. You don't get the millions in profit. The 1% choose to remove the shield. They want the exposure because they trust their ability to navigate the storm more than they trust the safety of the shore. Emotional regulation, the billionaire's superpower. If risk is the fire, emotional regulation is the heat shield. The 1% aren't braver than you. They just have a different relationship with their own adrenaline. When a normal person sees their investment drop by $10,000, they feel it in their gut. It feels like $10,000 worth of hours they spent working is being erased. Their perspective is past-oriented. They are looking at the labor it took to get that money. The 1% are future-oriented. When they see a drop, they don't think about the labor of the past. They think about the opportunity of the future. They separate their ego from their equity. They view themselves as allocators of capital, not owners of it. This detachment allows them to make cold, calculated moves when the rest of the world is screaming in panic. They also practice what is known as inversion. Instead of asking, "How can I make $1 million?" they ask, "What are the ways I could go totally bust, and how do I avoid those?" By eliminating the catastrophic risks, they leave themselves open to the inevitable windfalls of the market. They don't try to predict the weather. They build a boat that can survive any storm. The myth of the safe education. This chapter wouldn't be complete without addressing the risk of formal education. We are taught that a degree is a safe investment, but for many, it is the ultimate symmetric risk. You spend 4 to 8 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars to acquire a set of skills that might be obsolete by the time you graduate. The 1% view education as a lifelong, higher-risk, high-reward laboratory. They don't care about credentials. They care about rare and valuable skills. They are willing to spend 6 months wasting time learning a skill like high-stakes negotiation, complex systems design, or deep-level coding skills that have no guaranteed outcome but have the potential to multiply their value by 10x. They are comfortable with the risk of looking stupid, while the middle class is busy trying to look professional and stable. The 1% are busy experimenting, failing publicly, and learning the hard lessons that only come from actually being in the arena. Risk is not something to be avoided. It is something to be managed and harvested. The search for total certainty is a poverty trap. Real wealth is found in the asymmetric bet, where your downside is a small, manageable loss, and your upside is a life-changing win. We've mastered the internal thermostat and the external dance with risk. But there is one final resource that the 1% guard more fiercely than their money, time. In the next chapter, we'll explore why the hourly rate is a poison for your potential. Chapter 3. The Time Value Paradox. The poor sell their time to buy things. The middle class sell their time to buy comfort. The 1% buy time to create freedom. If you want to understand the deepest divide in human society, you have to look at how we perceive the ticking of a clock. To the vast majority of the world, time is a commodity to be traded. You go to an office, you stay for 8 hours, and you receive a slice of capital in return. This is the linear trap. It is the belief that your output is directly tied to your physical presence and your manual effort. The 1% look at this arrangement with a sense of quiet horror. They understand the time value paradox. Time is the only truly finite resource you possess. Yet it is the one most people are quickest to throw away for a flat rate. The wealthy don't want to work for money. They want to build engines that produce money while they sleep, eat, or play. They move from the world of labor to the world of leverage. The 4 levers of the modern world. In the physical world, a lever allows a small child to lift a massive boulder. In the financial world, leverage allows a single individual to move billions of dollars of value. The 1% are master architects of 4 specific types of leverage. Labor, the oldest lever. This is having people work for you. It's the classic corporate hierarchy. While powerful, it is the messiest form of leverage because humans require management, have emotions, and create friction. The 1% use this, but they don't rely on it exclusively. Capital, the heavy lever. This is using money to make money. If you have $10 million and it earns 7%, you've made $700,000 without lifting a finger. This is the goal of most investors, but it requires significant seed money to start. Code and media, the permissionless levers. This is the new wealth secret. A piece of software code or a YouTube video media works for you 24/7. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't ask for a raise, and it can be replicated 1 billion times at zero marginal cost. This is how the modern 1% are created, by building digital assets that scale infinitely. Systems and philosophy, the invisible lever. This is the ability to create a vibe or a standard that others follow. It's the brand of Apple or the investment philosophy of Warren Buffett. It's leverage that lives in the minds of others. The hourly rate poison. Most professionals, doctors, lawyers, high-end consultants fall into the high-income trap. They earn $500 an hour, which feels like winning. But psychologically, they are still in a cage. Because their income is tied to their time, they can never truly stop. If they take a month off, their income drops to zero. The 1% avoid the hourly rate mindset like a plague. They would rather earn $10,000 from an asset they spent 100 hours building once than earn $1,000 an hour for the rest of their lives. They understand decoupling. They want to break the link between input effort and output results. Imagine two authors. Author A writes articles for a magazine and gets paid $1 per word. Author B spends a year writing a book. Author A gets paid immediately, but has to keep writing forever. Author B earns nothing for a year, but once the book is finished, it sells for decades. Author B has created an asset. Author A has a job. The 1% are always Author B. The psychology of aggressive laziness. There is a concept I call aggressive laziness. The 1% are often lazy regarding low-value tasks. They will pay someone $50 to mow their lawn, not because they are too good for it, but because they know that in those 2 hours, they could be thinking about a deal worth $50,000. The middle class often suffers from the martyr complex, the idea that doing everything yourself is a sign of character. If you want it done right, do it yourself. To the 1%, that sentence is the fastest way to stay broke. If you are doing a $20 an hour task, you are, by definition, a $20 an hour person in that moment. The wealthy are ruthless about delegating or automating anything that doesn't require their unique genius. They protect their cognitive bandwidth because they know a single high-level decision is worth more than 1,000 hours of busy work. Nonlinear returns and the hockey stick. In the world of labor, to X the work equals to X the pay. In the world of the 1%, returns are not linear. You might work for 3 years on a startup or a portfolio with 0 results. You look like a failure to your neighbors. You are in what James Clear calls the plateau of latent potential. But then, something shifts. The compounding effect kicks in. The hockey stick curve begins. Suddenly, you make more in a month than you did in the previous decade. The psychology required to survive those 0 return years is what separates the 1% from the rest. Most people quit when they don't see an immediate return on their time. The 1% don't trade time for money. They trade time for equity. Equity is a claim on future value, and it is the only way to achieve true generational wealth. The trap of wealthy busyness. We must also address a darker psychological truth. Being busy is often a form of laziness, specifically lazy thinking. It's easy to fill your calendar with meetings and emails. It's hard to sit in a room alone and think about where the world is going. The 1% prioritize white space. They know that their value doesn't come from their activity, but from their judgment. Warren Buffett famously spends 80% of his day reading and thinking. To a middle-class observer, he looks like he's doing nothing, but that nothing allowed him to see patterns that others missed. The paradox of the 1% is that they work incredibly hard to reach a point where they don't have to work at all, so they can spend their time on the highest leverage activity of all, vision, reclaiming your sovereignty. To move into this mindset, you have to start valuing your time at an infinite rate. Stop asking what is my time worth, and start asking what can I build that will make my time irrelevant. The 1% don't buy Ferraris because they want to go fast. They buy them because they have so much excess time value that a $300,000 car represents only a few hours of their system's output. But the greatest luxury they possess isn't the car. It's the ability to wake up and ask, what do I want to do today? Rather than what do I have to do today? Wealth is not measured by how much money you have, but by how much time you own. To join the 1%, you must stop trading your life force for a paycheck and start building or buying assets that utilize leverage to produce value independently of your labor. Time is now on our side, but as your income grows, a new predator emerges, one that lives in your own mirror. In the next chapter, we'll explore the gap and why looking rich is the fastest way to stay poor. Chapter 4. The psychology of the gap. The masses use money to signal status they haven't earned. The 1% use anonymity to protect the wealth they've built. In the previous chapters, we discussed how to generate wealth through psychological recalibration and the mastery of leverage. But there is a silent killer that waits for every person who begins to climb the mountain of success. It is a psychological phenomenon known as the gap. The gap is the distance between your earning power and your lifestyle. For the average person, as income rises, the gap stays nearly zero. They get a 10% raise, and suddenly they need a 10% more expensive car. They move into a better neighborhood, and suddenly their furniture looks cheap, necessitating a total home makeover. This is the treadmill of the middle class, a high-speed race that ends exactly where it started. The 1% understand that wealth is not what you spend. It is the unspent difference. They treat the gap as a sacred space. To them, the wider the gap, the greater their freedom. To the rest of the world, a large gap is a missed opportunity to show off. The social signal trap. Human beings are tribal animals. We are hardwired to signal our position in the hierarchy to ensure our survival and reproductive success. Historically, if you were the strongest hunter, you wore the best furs. Today, if you are a successful professional, you are expected to wear the right watch, drive the right German sedan, and post photos from the right Mediterranean beach. The 1% have a different relationship with signaling. They realize that social signaling is a tax on the poor. When you buy a luxury item to look successful, you are essentially paying a validation tax to strangers who don't actually care about you. You are trading your future freedom for a fleeting hit of dopamine. The truly wealthy, the old money, and the quiet tech giants often practice stealth wealth. They dress in high-quality but unbranded clothing. They drive reliable, nondescript SUVs. They realize that the more people know about their wealth, the more targets they have on their backs. They don't want to be known. They want to be solvent. The one-way valve of luxury. The author explains a dangerous psychological principle. Luxury is a one-way valve. Once you upgrade your life, it is almost impossible to downgrade without experiencing intense psychological pain. If you are used to flying coach, a first-class seat is a treat. But once you fly private, first class feels like a bus. Once you live in a 5,000 square foot home, a 1,500 square foot apartment feels like a prison cell. This is hedonic adaptation. The human brain quickly resets its baseline for pleasure. The 1% manage this by artificially constraining their lifestyle. They live 2 or 3 levels below what they can actually afford. If they can afford a mansion, they live in a nice house. If they can afford a nice house, they live in a modest condo. This isn't because they are cheap. It's because they want to keep their burn rate low so that they are never a slave to their income. When your lifestyle costs $5,000 a month, but you make $50,000, you have 90% of your energy available for investment, risk-taking, and philanthropy. When your lifestyle costs $45,000, you are one bad month away from a nervous breakdown. The ego's balance sheet. In accounting, we have assets, things that put money in your pocket, and liabilities, things that take money out. The middle class often confuses the two. They call their home an asset, even though it costs them money every month. They call their car an asset. The 1% apply a psychological filter to their balance sheet. Is this an asset for my ego or an asset for my freedom? An ego asset is anything purchased to satisfy the "what will people think" voice. A freedom asset is anything that generates cash flow, appreciates in value, or grants you more time. The wealthy are ruthlessly biased toward freedom assets. They understand that the coolest thing you can own isn't a Ferrari. It's the ability to say no to a toxic boss, a bad deal, or a boring social obligation. True wealth is the power to ignore the crowd. The 1% aren't trying to win the keeping up with the Joneses game because they realized long ago that the Joneses are broke and miserable, drowning in credit card debt to maintain an image of a life they don't even enjoy. The delayed gratification muscle. At the heart of the gap is the ability to delay gratification. This is perhaps the single greatest predictor of financial success. In the famous marshmallow test, children who could wait to eat a second marshmallow later in life had better SAT scores, lower body mass indexes, and higher incomes. The 1% have turned this into a professional discipline. They view every dollar today as $10 in 10 years. When they see a $1,000 gadget, they don't see $1,000. They see the $10,000 that money could have become if it were invested in a compounding asset. They are literally buying the future by sacrificing the now. But there's a twist. The 1% don't live in total misery. Instead, they follow the rule of assets by luxuries. If they want a $100,000 car, they don't buy it with their salary. They buy a piece of real estate or a business that generates $2,000 a month in profit, and that profit pays for the car's lease. If the asset doesn't exist, the luxury doesn't exist. This ensures that their gap never shrinks. It only moves to a higher floor. The cultural pressure of the new rich. We live in an age of performative wealth. Instagram and TikTok have created a culture where if you didn't film your wealth, it didn't happen. This has led to a rise in pseudo-wealthy individuals who rent private jets for 30-minute photo shoots. The 1% look at this with amusement. They know that true wealth is silent. There is a certain forbidden law that suggests that the more someone talks about their money, the less they actually have. Real power doesn't need to shout. Real wealth doesn't need a logo on its chest. By mastering the psychology of the gap, you reclaim your mental energy. You stop scanning the room to see who is looking at you. You stop feeling the itch to spend every time a new deposit hits your account. You realize that the greatest status symbol of all is a calm mind and a massive growing pile of FU money that nobody knows about but you. Key takeaway: looking rich is the enemy of being rich. To join the 1%, you must widen the gap between what you earn and what you spend, treating every dollar saved not as a sacrifice of pleasure, but as a purchase of future freedom. We have mastered our spending, but what about the money we don't have yet? It's time to talk about a tool that the masses fear and the 1% worship. In the next chapter, we dive into the forbidden laws of debt. Chapter 5. The forbidden laws of debt. The poor use debt to buy things they can't afford. The middle class use debt to buy things they think they deserve. The 1% use debt to buy assets that make them untouchable. If you want to spark an argument at a middle-class dinner party, mention that you're taking out a massive loan. You'll be met with a chorus of neither a borrower nor a lender be or stay out of debt. Stay out of trouble. For the average person, debt is a dirty word, a heavy chain, a dark cloud, a sign of failure. And for them, it's true. For 99% of people, debt is a trap that drains their life force and keeps them tethered to a desk until they're 70. But as we peel back the layers of the 1% mindset, we encounter a startling contradiction. The wealthiest people on earth are often the ones with the most debt. The difference isn't in the amount of money owed, it's in the direction the money flows. In the forbidden psychology of wealth, there is a fundamental distinction between consumer debt and strategic leverage. One is a shackle, the other is a ladder, the two faces of the debt demon. To understand why the 1% love debt, we have to look at how they define it. To the masses, debt is a way to pull the future into the present. You want the big screen TV now, so you put it on a credit card. You want the vacation now, so you take out a personal loan. This is destructive debt. It is a trade where you give away your future freedom for a momentary hit of dopamine. You are paying interest for the privilege of owning something that is losing value every second. The 1%, however, use constructive debt. They don't use debt to buy things. They use it to buy income. Imagine two people, Alex and Sarah. Alex saves $100,000 of his hard-earned salary over 5 years. He uses that cash to buy a small condo outright. He now has a property that pays him $1,000 a month in rent. He feels safe because he has no debt. Sarah also has $100,000. But instead of buying one condo, she uses that money as a 20% down payment on 5 different condos. Taking out $400,000 in debt for each, she now controls $500,000 worth of real estate. Her debt is $400,000, which sounds terrifying to Alex. But here's the secret. The tenants are paying the interest, the principal, the taxes, and still leaving her with a profit. 10 years later, when property values double, Alex has $200,000 in equity. Sarah has $1 million in equity. Sarah used the forbidden law of OPM, other people's money, to accelerate her wealth 5 times faster than Alex. Alex worked for his money. Sarah's debt worked for her. The alchemy of inflation and devaluation. There is a psychological depth to debt that most people completely miss: the relationship between debt and the value of currency. The 1% understand that we live in a world of fiat currency money that is constantly being devalued by central banks. When you save $100,000 in a bank account, you are long on the dollar. If inflation is 5%, your savings are shrinking. You are losing the game by standing still. However, when you take out a fixed-rate loan to buy an asset, you are short on the dollar. You have borrowed expensive dollars today to buy an asset that grows in value. Over time, as inflation rises, you get to pay back that loan with cheap dollars that are worth much less. In a high-inflation environment, debt is a transfer of wealth from the lender to the borrower. The 1% don't just tolerate debt. They seek it out as a hedge against the very system that most people trust blindly: the margin of safety, psychology. Now, why doesn't everyone do this? Because it requires a level of emotional regulation that most people haven't developed. The 1% are not gamblers. They are calculators. They understand the concept of the margin of safety. A middle-class person takes on debt based on their best-case scenario: I'll keep my job, the market will go up. The 1% take on debt based on their worst-case scenario. They ask, if the market drops 30% and my income stays flat for a year, can I still service this debt? They only use leverage when the math tells them the asset's cash flow will cover the debt even in a storm. This is the psychological wall that stops the masses. They see the risk of the debt, but they don't see the risk of not using it. To the 1%, the risk of staying debt-free but remaining stagnant and exposed to inflation is much higher than the risk of carrying $10 million in strategic, low-interest loans backed by high-value assets. Debt as a tax strategy. One of the most forbidden secrets of the ultra-wealthy is that they use debt to avoid taxes legally. In most modern economies, you are taxed on what you earn, but you are not taxed on what you borrow. If a billionaire needs $10 million to buy a new estate or invest in a new venture, they don't sell their stocks. Selling stocks would trigger a capital gains tax, potentially 20% or more. Instead, they take out a loan against their stock portfolio. They get the $10 million in cash. They pay a tiny interest rate, often lower than the growth rate of the stocks, and they pay zero taxes on that liquidity. To the average person, this sounds like cheating. To the 1%, it is simply logical efficiency. They view the tax code not as a set of rules to be suffered, but as a map of incentives. By using debt instead of income, they keep their capital compounding at a higher rate. They aren't trying to get away with anything. They are simply refusing to pay a stupidity tax by exiting their winning positions. The emotional weight of the balance. To adopt this mindset, you have to break the emotional link between debt and shame. In our culture, being in the red is seen as a moral failing. The 1% view a balance sheet as a chessboard. There are no good or bad pieces, only moves that lead to victory or defeat. The 1% practice compartmentalization. They don't feel their debt in their body the way a consumer does. A person with $5,000 in credit card debt often feels more stress than a real estate mogul with $500 million in mortgages. Why? Because the consumer knows they have to trade their life hours of labor to pay it back. The mogul knows the asset will pay it back. This is the ultimate psychological shift, moving from being the source of repayment to being the manager of repayment. When you are the source, debt is a weight. When you are the manager, debt is an engine. Key takeaway: debt is a neutral tool that amplifies who you already are. If you are a consumer, debt will make you a slave. If you are an investor, debt will make you a master. The 1% use debt to acquire cash-flowing assets, hedge against inflation, and minimize taxes. Effectively using the financial system's own rules to escape it, we have mastered the tools of leverage and debt. But even the best tools are useless if you are surrounded by people who are constantly trying to pull you back down. In the next chapter, we look at the law of contagion and why your social circle is your destiny. Chapter 6. The Social Circle and the Law of Contagion. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. The 1%. Take this from a cliché to a ruthless survival strategy. If you were to walk into a room filled with the ultra-wealthy, you might expect to hear nothing but talk of stock tickers and offshore accounts. But the real currency being traded in those rooms is something far more subtle: psychological permission. The 1% understand a forbidden law that the middle class often finds offensive. Success is contagious, but so is mediocrity. We like to believe that our willpower is an island, that we can maintain a high-performance mindset while being surrounded by people who complain about their jobs, fear the future, and scoff at ambition. But the science of social psychology and the lived experience of the elite tells a different story. Your social circle acts as the gravity of your life. It either pulls you into orbit with the stars or drags you back down to the mud. The mirror neuron trap. At the base of our brain, we have mirror neurons. These are the biological mechanisms that allow us to learn by imitation. If you hang out with people who are physically fit, you will subconsciously start to mimic their eating habits and energy levels. If you hang out with people who think $100,000 is a lot of money, your brain will accept that as your ceiling. The 1% are ruthless about curating their inputs. They realize that if they spend their time with people who view the world through a lens of scarcity, they will eventually start to see the world that way too. They aren't being snobs. They are being mental hygienists. Just as you wouldn't drink poisoned water, they refuse to drink from a poisoned social well. They seek out expanders, people who make their biggest dreams look like small, everyday tasks. To a middle-class person, making $1 million a year is a pipe dream. To the 1%, it's a bad month. When you sit in a room where $1 million is the entry-level conversation, your mirror neurons stop seeing it as an impossibility and start seeing it as a baseline. The forbidden law here is simple. You cannot rise above the expectations of your tribe. The crab in a bucket syndrome. One of the hardest psychological hurdles to overcome on the path to the 1% is the resistance from those you love most. This is often called the crab mentality. If you put a single crab in a bucket, it will easily climb out. But if you put a dozen crabs in a bucket and one tries to escape, the others will reach up and pull it back down to its certain death. The middle class operates on a principle of social homeostasis. When you start to change, when you start talking about investing, reading different books, or working on a business, you are inadvertently shining a light on the fact that your friends aren't changing. This makes them uncomfortable. They will use shame, guilt, or concern to pull you back. Don't you think you're being too greedy? When is enough enough? You've changed. The 1% recognize this for what it is: an immune response from the collective. They understand that to move to the next level, you often have to leave your current social level behind. This is the dark, lonely side of wealth that no one tells you about. You don't just lose your debt, you often lose your old friends. The architecture of the mastermind. While the masses use social circles for entertainment, the 1% use them for environment. They build what Napoleon Hill called masterminds. This isn't just networking, which is often just people asking for favors. It is a deliberate alliance of individuals who are all playing the game at a high level. In a mastermind, the 1% trade two things: information and standards. 1. Information. They get access to dark knowledge, the deals that aren't on the public market, the tax strategies that aren't in the books, and the warnings about upcoming economic shifts that haven't hit the news yet. 2. Standards. They hold each other to a higher level of normal. If a member of a high-level group starts getting lazy or making excuses, the rest of the group doesn't sympathize. They challenge. The 1% pay for access. They will pay $50,000 for a seat at a table or $100,000 for a mastermind retreat. To the middle class, this looks like a waste of money. To the 1%, it is an investment in their operating system. They are buying the collective intelligence and the psychological permission to play a bigger game. The proximity is power principle. There is a psychological phenomenon where being physically near success changes your frequency. This is why the 1% cluster in specific zip codes, specific clubs, and specific conferences. It's not just for the amenities, it's for the collisions. When you are in a high-wealth environment, the forbidden laws are spoken aloud. You overhear conversations about trust structures at the coffee shop. You see how people carry themselves with a quiet, unhurried confidence. You realize that these people aren't smarter than you. They just have a different set of assumptions about what is possible. Proximity collapses the distance between I want and I have. It turns a distant goal into a tangible reality. The 1% ensure that their current reality is constantly being challenged by people who are 5 steps ahead of them. They would rather be the poorest person in a room of billionaires than the richest person in a room of thousands. In the first room, they have room to grow. In the second, they have only the ego trap of being the big fish in a small, stagnant pond. The law of selective vulnerability. Finally, the 1% are very careful about who they are vulnerable with. In a middle-class setting, venting about problems is a bonding ritual. People sit around and talk about how hard things are. This creates a co-rumination loop that keeps everyone stuck. The 1% don't vent to their inferiors or their peers. They solve with their mentors. They understand that complaining is a form of poverty signaling. It broadcasts that you are not in control of your environment. Instead, they maintain a frame of competence with the world while being ruthlessly honest with a very small, selected inner circle. This allows them to project the authority needed for high-level deals while still getting the psychological support they need to avoid burnout. Key takeaway: your environment is your destiny. The 1% treat their social circle as a garden. They prune the weeds of negativity and scarcity, and they water the seeds of ambition and high standards. If you want to change your bank account, you must first change your phone's contact list. Your circle is set. Your mind is sharp. Now, you must learn the economics of perception. In the next chapter, we explore why the world doesn't pay you for what you do, but for how you are perceived. Chapter 7. Perception as currency. The world does not reward you for the labor you provide. It rewards you for the value it perceives you provide. The 1% aren't in the business of products. They are in the business of narrative. If you want to understand why a plain white t-shirt from a luxury brand costs $500, while an identical shirt from a big box store costs $5, you have to abandon the logic of utility. Most of us are raised in the meritocracy of effort. We are taught that if we work 10 hours, we should be paid for 10 hours. We believe that value is a fixed, objective truth based on materials and labor. The 1% know this is a delusion. They understand the economics of perception. They realize that value is not a fact. It is a feeling. It is a story told by the seller and accepted by the buyer. While the masses compete at the bottom of the mountain, arguing over pennies, hours, and features, the 1% live at the peak, where they manipulate the psychological premium. The commodity trap versus the monopoly mindset. The average person spends their life selling a commodity. A commodity is anything that is easily replaceable. If you are a generic accountant, a generic coder, or a generic manager, you are a commodity. When you are a commodity, the buyer, your boss, or your client has all the power. They can always find someone else to do it cheaper. This leads to a race to the bottom, where you are constantly forced to lower your price or work more hours just to stay relevant. The 1% seek to create a monopoly of perception. They don't want to be better. They want to be only. They position themselves, their brands, and their services in a way that makes comparison impossible. Think of the difference between a fitness trainer and a body transformation architect for high-stakes CEOs. The labor might be more lifting, weights, and counting calories, but the perception is worlds apart. One is a $50 an hour expense. The other is a $50,000 a year investment in a CEO's longevity and performance. The 1% don't change the work. They change the frame. By narrowing their focus and elevating their narrative, they exit the world of fair pay and enter the world of extraordinary returns. The halo effect and the power of branding. In psychology, there is a phenomenon called the halo effect. It's a cognitive bias where our overall impression of a person influences how we feel and think about their character in specific areas. If someone looks successful, we subconsciously assume they are intelligent, trustworthy, and capable. The 1% use the halo effect as a strategic tool. They understand that how you do anything is how you do everything. This is why the wealthy invest so much in their presentation, not for the sake of vanity, but for the sake of lowering transaction friction. If a dealmaker arrives in a pristine, well-tailored suit and speaks with absolute conviction, the perceived risk of the deal drops. The person on the other side of the table feels safer. This perception of safety allows the 1% to command higher margins. They aren't just selling a deal. They are selling the feeling of certainty. The middle class often scoffs at this, calling it fake or superficial. But the 1% know that in a world of infinite noise, a clear high-status signal is the most valuable currency there is. The scarcity principle, creating desirability. Why is a diamond valuable? It's not because it's particularly rare in nature. It's because the perception of its rarity is meticulously managed. The 1% apply this forbidden law to themselves and their ventures. The masses make the mistake of being too available. They respond to every email instantly. They take every meeting. They are eager to please. In the psychology of wealth, eagerness is a low-value signal. It suggests that your time isn't in demand. The 1% practice strategic inaccessibility. They understand that value increases as supply decreases. By being harder to reach, by having wait lists for their services, and by being willing to walk away from deals, they create a vacuum of desire. They make the other party chase them. This shift in the power dynamic allows them to set the terms. They don't ask for a seat at the table. They create a table that everyone else is dying to sit at. The alchemy of storytelling. Every great fortune is built on a story. Whether it's Elon Musk selling the story of a multiplanetary species, or a local real estate mogul selling the story of a revitalized community, the 1% are master narrators. Most people try to sell with logic and features. Our software has 50 features and costs 10% less. Logic makes people think, but emotion makes people act. The 1% sell with vision. They don't tell you what the product is. They tell you who you will become if you own it. They understand that people don't buy things. They buy identity and solutions to pain. If you can articulate a person's pain better than they can, they will subconsciously credit you with having the solution. This is the ultimate forbidden law of persuasion. The 1% spend more time studying human psychology and the hero's journey than they do studying spreadsheets, because they know that a compelling story can raise billions, while a perfect spreadsheet can barely get a bank loan. The cost of a cheap reputation. There is a psychological trap in trying to be the cheapest option. When you compete on price, you attract price-sensitive clients. These are often the most demanding, least loyal, and most stressful people to deal with. They view you as a utility. The 1% aim for the high-end stress gap by charging more, sometimes 10x the market rate. They actually attract better clients. These clients are results sensitive, not price sensitive. They are easier to work with because they value their own time as much as yours. The author reflects on a profound truth. Price is a filter. If you charge $10 for a book, people will buy it and never read it. If you charge $1,000 for a seminar, people will show up early, take notes, and implement every word. The higher the price, the higher the perceived value, and the more buy-in you get from the world. The 1% use high prices to filter for the best opportunities and the best people. Reclaiming the narrative. To join the 1%, you must stop being a worker and start being a perceived authority. This requires an audit of your personal and professional narrative. Are you presenting yourself as a help-wanted applicant or a problem-solving partner? Is your brand built on doing tasks or delivering outcomes? Are you selling your time, which is finite, or your intellectual property, which is infinite? The world is a stage, and the 1% are the directors. They realize that the forbidden law of perception means that you don't get what you deserve. You get what you have the courage to claim and the skill to project. Key takeaway. Value is a psychological construct, not a physical one. To escape the commodity trap, you must master the art of perception, using branding, scarcity, and storytelling to position yourself as a unique, high-value authority rather than a replaceable labor source. We have built the wealth, the circle, and the brand. But the most dangerous part of the journey isn't the climates, staying at the top without losing your mind. In our final chapter, we look at the resilience of the wealthy mind. Chapter 8. The resilience of the wealthy mind. Making money requires courage. Keeping money requires restraint. But living a wealthy life requires the mastery of the ego. We have reached the final stage of our journey. You have learned to rewire your internal thermostat, dance with risk, leverage time, guard the gap, utilize strategic debt, and curate a high-status perception. But there is a reason why many who find themselves in the 1% eventually tumble back down, or worse, stay wealthy but become miserable. The final forbidden law isn't about the market, it's about the mirror. Success is a double-edged sword. It provides freedom, but it also acts as a psychological amplifier. If you are a person prone to anxiety, wealth will give you a bigger platform to worry on. If you are prone to ego, wealth will turn that ego into a monster that eventually eats your assets. The 1% who stay there are those who have developed a specific kind of mental resilience, an antifragility that allows them to thrive in chaos and remain grounded in triumph. The winner's curse and the ego trap. In the beginning, your ego is your friend. It's the voice that tells you that you're better than your current circumstances. It's the engine of your ambition. But once you reach the top 1%, that same ego becomes your greatest liability. This is the winner's curse. The 1% understand that success often leads to intellectual arrogance. You start to believe that because you were right about one thing, your business, your investments, you are right about everything. You stop listening. You stop learning. You start taking stupid risks because you think you have a Midas touch. To combat this, the resilient, wealthy practice intellectual humility. They maintain what Zen Buddhists call beginner's mind. They are obsessed with finding where they might be wrong. While the masses spend their time trying to be right, to feel good, the 1% spend their time trying to find the truth, to be good. They hire people who disagree with them. They seek out data that contradicts their beliefs. They realize that their wealth is a result of their judgment, and judgment is only as good as the clarity of their perception. Antifragility, growing from the burn. Most people seek stability. They want a life where nothing goes wrong. But the 1% realize that stability is a myth. The world is a series of shocks, market crashes, pandemics, technological disruptions. Instead of being resilient, which means resisting a shock and staying the same, they strive to be antifragile. Coined by Nassim Taleb, antifragility is the property of systems that actually get better when they are stressed. A muscle is antifragile. You tear it, and it grows back stronger. The 1% build their financial and psychological lives this way. Psychologically, they view a failure not as a loss of capital, but as a tuition payment to the University of Experience. They don't say, "Why did this happen to me?" They ask, "What does this allow me to do now?" When the market crashes, they don't panic sell. They look for the blood in the streets and buy the fire sale assets. They have built a psychological buffer that allows them to stay calm while everyone else is losing their heads. They know that wealth is moved from the impatient to the patient during times of crisis. The dopamine management discipline. We live in a world designed to hijack our dopamine. For the wealthy, this is amplified. When you have the money to buy anything, go anywhere, and do anything, your reward system can easily become desensitized. This leads to the hedonic treadmill on steroids, constantly seeking bigger hits of excitement, which leads to burnout and poor The 1% practice dopamine stewardship. They understand that the greatest luxury isn't more, it's enough. They find joy in the process of creation rather than the act of consumption. They set internal goals, mastering a skill, solving a complex problem rather than external goals, buying a bigger boat. By decoupling their happiness from their net worth, they become untouchable. If the market takes away half their money, they are still the same person with the same skills and the same internal peace. This is the ultimate forbidden law. The only way to truly own wealth is to be willing to lose it all without losing yourself. The sovereignty of no. As you become successful, the world will start to want things from you. You will be bombarded with opportunities, partnerships, and charity requests. The middle-class mind, conditioned by a desire to be liked, says yes too often. They spread themselves thin until they are mediocre at everything. The 1% are masters of the hell yes or no rule. If an opportunity doesn't make them say hell yes, they say no. They realize that their time and attention are their most precious assets. Being wealthy means having the sovereignty to protect your focus. They would rather do one thing at a world-class level than 10 things at a rich level. Resilience comes from the strength of your boundaries. By saying no to the good, they stay available for the great. The legacy shift from success to significance. The final stage of the 1% mind is the transition from success, getting what you want, to significance, giving what you have. There is a psychological ceiling to how much money can improve your life. Once your basic needs, your comforts, and your security are met, more money has diminishing marginal utility. The 1% who stay resilient are those who find a purpose larger than their own bank account. They move into generative wealth, building things that will outlast them. This could be a foundation, a revolutionary company, or a philosophical legacy. This shift in focus from self to system provides a level of psychological resilience that no amount of luxury can buy. It gives them a reason to get out of bed when they already have everything they could ever need. They realize that they are not the owners of their wealth, but the stewards of it. They are part of a larger flow of value through history. The final reflection, the internal kingdom. As we conclude this chapter, consider this. The 1% don't just think differently about money. They think differently about existence. They realize that the forbidden laws are actually just the natural laws of a world that is indifferent to our feelings but highly responsive to our actions. They don't wait for permission. They don't complain about the rules. They learn the rules. They master the psychology of the players, and then they play the game with everything they've got. But they do it with a quiet heart. They know that the true 1% are not just those with the most money, but those who have the most freedom, the freedom to think, to move, to choose, and to be. Key takeaway: the ultimate test of wealth is not how you get it, but who you become while holding it. Resilience is found in the balance between ambition and humility, between taking risks and maintaining a margin of safety, and between owning the world and not being owned by it. The journey through the chapters is complete. We have deconstructed the forbidden laws and rebuilt a new mental architecture. Now, it is time to bring it all together. In our final conclusion, we will look at how to apply these principles to your life, starting today. Conclusion: the wealth within. We have traveled a long road together, from the hidden blueprints of our childhood financial operating systems to the high-altitude logic of the ultra-wealthy. We have dismantled the myths of hard work, the illusions of security, and the seductive trap of looking rich. What remains is not just a collection of strategies, but a fundamental shift in the way you perceive the world. The deeper message of how the 1% really think is that wealth is not a trophy you collect. It is a byproduct of the person you decide to become. The forbidden laws we've discussed are only forbidden because they require us to take a level of radical responsibility that most people find terrifying. It is much easier to blame the economy, the government, or luck than it is to admit that our financial reality is a mirror of our psychological architecture. The psychological impact of the shift, moving into this 1% mindset, creates a profound change in your relationship with the world. You begin to see problems as market gaps. You see risks as the price of admission for a better life. Most importantly, you stop being a victim of circumstance and start being a creator of value. This transition is often lonely at first. You will find that you no longer speak the same language as the people you grew up with. While they are discussing the latest gossip or the rising cost of living, you are thinking in terms of systems, leverage, and 10-year horizons. But this loneliness of the heights is where true sovereignty is found. The ultimate goal of financial psychology isn't to buy a bigger house or a faster car. It is to reach a state of psychological freedom. It is the ability to walk away from anything that compromises your integrity or drains your spirit. Wealth is the fuel that allows you to live life on your own terms, answering to no one but your own conscience and vision. 5 practical principles for the real world. As you close this chapter and return to your daily life, I want you to carry 5 core principles with you. These are the anchors that will keep you on the path of the 1%. Upgrade the thermostat. Periodically audit your internal baseline. If you find yourself getting comfortable with mediocrity or stressed by small successes, realize that your internal thermostat needs a recalibration. Expand your normal by surrounding yourself with people who are playing a much bigger game. Buy back your time. Every time you receive a paycheck or a profit, ask yourself, how much of my time can this buy back? Move from trading hours for dollars to building assets that trade value for freedom. Remember, a man who works 12 hours a day for someone else is a slave. Regardless of the size of the paycheck, widen the gap. Ignore the urge to signal status. Let your bank account grow in silence while your lifestyle stays modest. The gap between what you earn and what you spend is your true power. Use that power to buy assets, not toys. Embrace asymmetry. Stop looking for safe bets. Look for opportunities where the downside is limited and the upside is uncapped. Be willing to look stupid, to fail, and to experiment. The world pays a premium for those who can navigate uncertainty. Become the master of narrative. Whether you are selling a product, a service, or yourself, remember that perception is the ultimate currency. Don't just work harder. Tell a better story. Position yourself as a unique, high-value authority who solves specific, painful problems. The final reflection. As we part ways, I want to leave you with one final thought. There is a story about an old man who, on his deathbed, was asked what his greatest regret was. He replied, "I spent my whole life worrying about the bills I had to pay and the things I had to buy, only to realize at the end that the most valuable thing I ever had was the one thing I was always selling, my time." The 1% understand that the clock is always ticking. They don't seek wealth because they are greedy. They seek wealth because they are aware of their own mortality. They want to squeeze every drop of potential out of their short time on this planet. So, I ask you, if money were no longer an issue, if you had mastered the laws of financial psychology and built your engine of freedom, who would you be? What would you create? What legacy would you leave behind? The glass wall is thinner than you think. You've seen the map. You know the laws. The only thing left is to step through. Thank you for joining me on this guided intellectual journey. I have synthesized the core philosophies and psychological underpinnings of how the 1% really think into a narrative designed to transform not just your bank account, but your perspective on life itself.